There it goes. Hey, there we are. I've had a bunch of technical issues today. I had to reboot my phone and my computer this morning to do the podcast. It wasn't recording properly, and then the phone wasn't taking Evan's call, which maybe should have been a sign. But anyway, yeah, so we're almost done. Beautiful weekend in Minnesota. It was gorgeous. Everybody get out, have a good Mother's Day, and use that as an excuse not to study. All right. From a check-in, everybody has read through chapters 1 through 6. We're almost ready to go on that. Have any questions so far on anything that we've covered? Otherwise, we'll just keep going and go from there. Yeah, the toughest parts, some of the toughest, I think now we're looking at, you'll start seeing a little bit of repetition. You'll start going through it. I was going through the slides and went, didn't we already? Oh, no, wait, that's right. They cover them in both spots.
No slideshow.
Man, can you tell I am not? Let's see.
There we go.
There we go. You didn't miss anything online. Toughest parts, now is a lot more of the technical. We're starting to see a lot more repetition. So yeah, only 99 slides. It's a light day. I think I actually added a couple, but it's okay. All right. So what now, Lori? Okay.
Two thumbs up.
Okay, good. Just giving Lori grief. She's awesome. Thank you, Lori. So we're seeing a little more in Slack. If you need anything, there's the email address. If you're still here, you should be proud of yourself. Not a lot of people make it all the way through. It's a lot to take in. So just keep going. You're almost through. I think we're still going to try and do something on the last class for everyone who's made it the whole way, been here the whole time. We'll see. All right. What technique would raise the false accept rate and lower the false reject rate in a fingerprint scanning system? We're going to decrease the amount of minutia, the amount of data, so the amount of data points. We're going to increase the amount of data points, lengthen the enrollment time, or lower the throughput time. So, yeah. And so what's the difference between false accept, false reject?
More data.
False accept is people that shouldn't be getting in are getting in. False reject, people that should be getting in are not. So the more data we collect, the less likely we are to falsely accept someone. It's got to be a better match, but we also then increase the rejection rate, or potentially do. So yes, decrease the amount of minutia verified. So, right, if you're taking 10 data points or 50 data points on a fingerprint, that's a big difference. The lower data points, the more likely you would increase false accept rates. All right. Policy that states a user must have a business requirement to view data before attempting to do so is an example of enforcing what? Least privilege, need to know, rotation of duties, or separation of duties. Need to know. Yep. All right. Server A trusts server B trusts server C. Therefore, server A trusts server C. There's a part of that question missing, but that's okay. What term describes this trust relationship? So remember we talked about this. You guys know what it is?
T.
All right, see, I don't have to go through that. Good job. All right. What protocol provides a common open protocol for interfacing and querying directory service information using 389? Oh, good. So this is one of those ones that has common ports that we kept talking about and had posted. You're just gonna have to know. Within Kerberos, which part is the single point of failure? Yeah, it is. Key distribution center, there's only one. And then a type 2 biometric error is also known as what? If there's a lot of these, you're in. Yep, false accept. So you just have to be able to tell the difference and know those things. But crushing it, see, be fine. All right, so domain 6, assessment and testing, designing, performing, and analyzing security testing. Said there's only 2 objectives. This is a quick chapter. There's a lot in there though, don't worry. Especially if you're not a software developer. So a lot of this will seem maybe a little bit foreign to you, but it's not too bad. All right, starting on page 329 of the book for anyone that's following along on the book. Some terms we're gonna go through. Again, you're gonna need to be able to tell these apart. They're gonna give you an example and say, what is this an example of? And it'll be one of the definitions. So we're gonna go through all these here again in more detail. So I'll spend a lot of time on that. So when we do the assessment and testing are critical. So really what we're looking at is assessing real world security. And how do you know where to start if you don't, unless you've done an assessment? At the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to for a security assessment. 2 types, overall security. So that's going to cover everything, right? Holistic almost, if you want to think of it that way. And then testing your software, you have static testing and dynamic testing. Static, it's not moving, it's not running. Dynamic is, it is running, you're testing it while it's running. So when we do access control, we need to determine our scope, right? It's pretty easy. What are we testing and why are we testing it? Without that definition first, you can't have a good assessment. I don't know if I have a full assessment if I haven't defined what I'm covering. So pen testing, that's where you normally see that more narrow scope. High trust, SOC 2, those are scoped down. Those are assessments or audits against a very specific set of systems. The broad scope is going to include a lot of that narrow scope. So when you do vulnerability scanning, you're only testing the one piece, right? You're looking at just the patch management basically of your network. A broad scope assessment should include part of that, or should include that narrower scope. All right, so we're gonna need to know about penetration testing, need to know the differences, what and why, and a little bit about how. But looking at internal or network for your internet, the or DMZ, I'm sorry, your internet testing, your internal or DMZ. We'll talk about war dialing. Anybody know what that is? Okay, good. We'll talk about wireless pen testing and then physical pen testing. Physical pen testing really is social engineering. At the end of the day, a lot of that, it comes down to social engineering, but there's some parts of it that, are we gonna actually be able to pick locks or physically do things, or do you want us just to socially engineer? Ideally, at the end of the day, we're simulating the different types of attacks. Right? So a client-side attack, a server-side attack, a web application. We want to understand and try and identify any weaknesses in the scoped systems. All right, so black hat and white hat. You will need to know the difference on this. Black hat, the villain traditionally, right? Darth Vader is black in the old Westerns. Those were the black hats. It's where it comes from. White hat, good guys. So black hats are going to be, like it says, lacking ethics. They're not playing by the rules, right? White hats, we have to play by the rules. There's laws, there's rules of engagement. That's what we have to follow. Black hats are not. They're not beholden to those same rules and laws. So, sometimes violate the law, break into systems with malicious intent. Violating confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the data. White hat, that's where we get hired. You get hired to come and actually test systems, right? You'd rather hire someone to find that weakness than be told you've been owned and have a weakness. The professional pen testers, the malware researchers, the ethical hackers is really what that's considered. So those are the ones that have a code of ethics. They have to obey the laws. Gray hat, kind of in between, right? So gray hat would be maybe they're doing this with good intentions, but don't always follow the laws, or they'll alert the company. If they don't respond in what they consider an appropriate amount of time, they'll go and sell it. Or we'll see it, you'll see it with like, maybe they'll alert a smaller company, but Apple or somebody that they maybe have they don't like, for whatever reason, they would sell those exploits out on the black market. So they kind of go back and forth. It's not always a malicious intent, but yeah, they're confused. There you go. Easy to remember, right? All right, so war dialing, it's a modem. It's going to call the series of numbers. So there will be a little picture of what it looks like. They basically put it in the range, and it just dials. Once you get an answer for that from modem, you then try to access it. So it's literally just calling a list of numbers, and then it spits out a response of, here are the ones that meet the criteria you were looking for. Right? Either it being a modem responding, fax machine responding, something along those lines. Yeah, 1983 movie War Games. Social engineering we need to know. So war dialing, that's all you need to know. It's modem, right? Just calling the numbers. Social engineering, we're using people, we're exploiting people. You're making people do what you want them to do, whether they realize it or not. You can use it in combination. Physical one being the biggest, I think probably where you see that. You could use it in some client-side attacks where you're trying to exploit a client, and so you call somebody and get their username and password. Right? People are the weakest link in that systems can be hardened and then they don't change. It's a lot easier to go through somebody's receptionist or executive assistant than hack a firewall. So client-side emailing malware, subject line of Category 5 hurricane about to hit Florida, so maybe they click on the link and download malicious software. Again, just trying to get something on that client side, either that credentials, physical social engineering, tailgating an authorized user into a building. Kind of talked about that in Minnesota. If you show up with a box of donuts or a cake box, they'll let you right in. All right, so there's a lot around social engineering. You need to know kind of where you're at and the history and the different culture. There you go. That's War Games. Lots of blinky lights.
Looks cool.
There you go. All right. So that's what a war dialer looks like. So you'll see it. So it's starting the number and where it's going, and it's got, here, I'll actually do the, it's got your start number that you're starting with and the ending number, the area code, and you just hit every number in between it. So in this case, they're hit 1,000 numbers.
A lot of times the modems get overlooked,
Yep.
server rooms and stuff. They get put in there a long time ago and everyone forgets they're there. Then phone numbers a lot of times aren't even in their range of what they're actually looking for. It doesn't show up on anything. It's just a regular POTS line that gets put in, and
somebody connected to it and nobody knows.
Maybe there was that use at one time, a long time ago, but then somebody forgets about it. So don't forget to look for those kinds of things.
So yeah, so copyright 1988 probably still works.
Modems last forever.
Yeah, they never go away. I know I've been in places where it's like you're cleaning up and you're like, what?
Yeah.
What is this for? It's not connected.
US robotics modem.
All right, so going back to pen testing. 3 types of pen testing we need to know about: zero knowledge or black box. Right? We don't know anything. They're just saying, test us. Here's the company information. You find what you can and test what you find. Full knowledge, crystal box or white box. Internal information, so hey, here's the list of IPs we want to test. Here's the list of URLs from an external perspective. Internally, here's all our segmentation. You're given all that information and testing it for weaknesses. I think this one is probably the best results, because we're not guessing. We're not going to miss anything. As a pen tester, all right, here's what have I covered everything. Right? It's a lot. The black box takes longer. You have to enumerate, you have to go and try and determine and find all this stuff. Partial knowledge, kind of in between, some limited information. You know, you're looking at maybe they give you some IPs that they want to exclude, or, you know, specific targets that would be the focus. But in between, just know the difference. Zero knowledge, we don't know anything. It's just what can we find about the company or what the target. Full knowledge, white box, full information, whatever the pen tester requests, the company is going to provide them that information. Partial knowledge is going to fall in between. There's some tools. I don't think you'll need to know any of those, but they're really good resources. If you have anybody used any of the either Metasploit or Core Impact Immunity Canvas, Metasploit is pretty cool. Sectools.org has a list of a lot of tools, but only use them if you have permission. Don't go doing it without permission. Kali Linux is kind of the go-to for pen testing. It's a Linux distribution with all the pen testing tools built in. So that's the go-to. And then who just released their Windows version? Is it FireEye maybe? They released a toolkit for Windows. I think it was FireEye. Anyway, it's a kind of an offset from this. So it's a really good set of tools to use in Windows. Is it FireEye or Mandiant?
I'll find it.
Oh no, wait, you know what? I bet it's Mandiant. All right, Chad's gonna find that out. No, it's look up like it's a commander for Windows or something. Anyway, all right. So methodology. This is important to understand. You're gonna do your planning, right? What are we attacking? What are we doing? What is the scope of this? Is it a black box? Is it a white box? What do I know? Is it partial knowledge? Here's what I have. Here's what I'm missing. Our reconnaissance, we're gonna go and find what we can publicly. This could include IP addresses, could include email addresses, anything about the organization that you're attempting to pen test that you would want and potentially use. Scanning or enumeration, pretty straightforward. We're just gonna do a port scan. What's there? What's listening? If it's not responding, I'm not gonna waste my time trying to do a vulnerability assessment against it. So there's a lot of tools for that. Nmap can do that, Angry IP Scanner, things like that, where you're just, tell me what's there.
FireEye.
It is FireEye, yeah.
Commando.
Commando
VM.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be really cool. Anyway, vulnerability assessment, so vulnerability scanning, right? So once we have enumerated the ports and what's active and listening, what's the status of those? Are they patched? What versions are they running? What am I working with? Once you get that vulnerability assessment and the scanning, the enumeration results, that's when you go ahead and do your exploitation. Now, what that's going to be is looking at that and determining, all right, here's what I can hit. Here's what's available for me to attempt to exploit. And then you report on that. So high level, that's what that is. Black Hat, yeah, it's going to follow a similar methodology. The only difference there is they're going to typically do an additional step of erasing their tracks, right? Deleting logs, trying to hide that they were even there. Yeah, and then the backdoors, so persistence mechanisms. Really good read, pen test framework. TrustedSec.com has that. That's kind of the go-to standard at this point. And that's what our pen testers follow as well. So if you want to read more about that. So when we do this, what about pen testing is one of the parts, the confidentiality, integrity, system integrity. We need to make sure that anything that we get you're potentially going to be seeing sensitive information, right? Because we're going to go out and enumerate maybe file shares. What can I find? If you find employment records, medical records, things like that, those are things you have to take into consideration. How am I going to protect that information and confidentiality? And assuming, you know, white hat at this point, right? Black hat, they don't care. So a lot of times they request a dummy file with no sensitive data in the same area. And that way, you know, a code word or something, or a phrase that the company picks that they don't tell us. And then in the report, it would be, you know, as a result, we found the phrase, you know, this code word or whatever it is in that file. That way we're not, you know, accessing their sensitive information. We can then report back and prove that we actually did get into where they were trying to keep us out. Yeah, so you can either read or write to it, you know, hey, I got the file, or they'll ask a question and you put in a response, and then they check it and see, oh, it's been changed. I wonder when they did that. And often, even the ones where they claim they've got really good logging and they got good systems in place, we can usually get around that. System integrity, data integrity. So as you're doing the pen testing, we can't create a denial of service attack. If you are taking down systems, it's negative for the business. That's not what we're trying to do. And then one big one really is the current malware attack that happens. We're going in to do a pen test and identify that, oh, yeah, you're currently breached. At that point, you step back and let them know, and then we stop the pen test until that breach is contained and appropriate steps are taken. And it does happen. A lot of times you want to make sure that as you're going through this with the company, you would, in the event that we identify a breach, here's what we're going to do. And then everybody's on the same page. Any questions on that? All right. So vulnerability testing, so scanning, I think a lot of the times with this, you get a lot of confusion. You'll see this a lot where, you know, I'm having a vulnerability assessment or I'm having a pen test, and then it's simply a scan. It's just automated. There's no actual exploitation attempted. It's not the same thing.
I was on call with one of those today.
It happens.
They swear up and down it's a pen test. I'm like, you know, not the way you told it to me.
That's the big one, right? A vulnerability scan, we're just going to identify vulnerabilities and weaknesses on those IPs. There's no attempted exploitation. That pen test is actually going to attempt to exploit it. There is a
burglar attempt versus home inspection.
Yeah, that's a really good way.
That's how I always explain it. It's a home inspection. You know, I want that guy to come in, that gal to come in and look at everything. I want to know if my foundation's bad, my roof is bad, my windows are bad, wherever there's weaknesses, you know, that they can point out to me. Whereas a burglar attempt is, or a pen test and a burglar attempt are the same thing. My defenses are up. I'm watching for them. My alarm's set. My dog's out. You know, I'm ready for them, kind of a deal. So they get confused all the time. Yeah,
there's a clear, definitive objective in a pen test. We are going to do these things. Get your password hash, we're gonna get domain admin. A vulnerability assessment is we're gonna identify your vulnerabilities. We're not gonna actually exploit them.
Right.
The big three, really, Nessus, it was open VAS, that has kind of gone private, and I'm not sure what's going on with that. Qualys, and then Rapid7 or Expose. Those are really, that probably covers 90–95% of vulnerability scanners out there. Again, looking for missing patches, configuration errors, unsupported software, you know, ports that maybe shouldn't be open, or listening on things that we wouldn't want to see. And then they're going to use the CVSS, that common vulnerability scoring system, which right here, it assigns a score to each of the vulnerabilities on a 1 to 10 scale. 10 being patch it and hope they haven't exploited it already.
Yeah.
Right. So just to understand what the CVSS is, they're not going to test you specifically on it, but that it is a rating system for vulnerabilities. All right, so security assessment, holistic approach, right? We want to look at the organization as a whole. Pen testing, vulnerability assessments, those are narrowed scope. So the full security assessment has to cover the whole gamut of information security, not just a portion of it. Again, broad scope, looking at many of the controls. You know, what are we looking at? Policies, your procedures, your administrative controls, right? The documentation you have around your security program. Is there governance in place? You know, are you following one of the security models? And if so, are you the government? Because nobody else does. Biba and Lapel Apache. Come on, you guys remember that? You haven't blocked all that out already, have you? Okay. You know, what is the real world effectiveness of your administrative controls? So you've got policies in place, you've got procedures in place. Are people actually following them? And we need to understand all that. Change management programs, your architecture, pen tests. So those are those more narrowed scope that are part of the larger assessment. Very key, assessing the effectiveness, right? It's not necessarily an audit, but we want to know how, yeah, you've got this, but is anyone actually following it? So we're looking at what's the effectiveness. Where are there gaps? We're looking for those vulnerabilities, because remember, the vulnerabilities plus threats is your likelihood and impacts, and there's your risk. So we want to identify where are the risks. That's ours, is the FISA and FISA score. So we look at the security assessment. What is the definition of information security? What is the definition of information security? I haven't covered it. Oh, he's gonna be so disappointed. Protecting confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data using the administrative and physical and technical controls. Right. So we want to make sure when we do a whole broad security assessment, we're looking at all three pieces. If you're only looking at technical controls, you're missing 2/3 of the puzzle. Right? It's that three-legged stool. Got to look at all three to do that. So this is ours. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. If you haven't seen it already, we can talk later, but it's really good. It just puts a score to your risk score. All right. Internal and third-party audits, very different than a security assessment. Assessment, tell me what you're doing. Let's look at how effective it is what you have written down, what people are actually doing with, without really going deep diving into collecting a lot of proof, right? Whereas an internal audit or an audit's gonna be, you know, I might say in an assessment, what are you using for your endpoint protection? Oh, I'm using this. Oh, okay, do you manage it? How do you manage it? Tell me about what your process is around it. And then, excuse me, looking at any documentation you might have with policy or procedure to manage it. An audit's gonna say, I need to see a sample of all of your machines on these dates, and then I need to see the installation of the endpoint protection on those dates, match them up. Is everything that is being said that's being done actually being done? They're collecting that evidence, right? So high trust being a big one. Internal audit, SOC 2, that's really kind of more that truly an audit piece. But internal audit, it's an internal department that's doing this. So a lot of times you'll see that happening, you know, throughout the year. And then a third party is where you're bringing somebody in. And obviously, the big difference with internal and third party is that credibility, right? What's the human nature is always going to be to give yourself kind of the benefit of the doubt. At the end of the day, right? You don't want to grade your own homework. It's gonna, if somebody else is grading it, there's additional levels there. And additionally, third party, a lot of times they'll teach, right? So when you come in as a third party, they're asking why should we be doing this, or what's the reasoning behind it? You have an opportunity to do some teaching around that. All right, log reviews. So reviewing security audit logs is an easy way to verify control mechanisms are in place. So we're gonna get hopefully have a log aggregation SIM solution, some sort of log aggregator. Are people actually logging in? Do we see any anomalies? Why is Chad logging in at 2 a.m. from Belarus? I just picked a random Eastern
I
European
might be
or Western.
traveling. I don't even know where that is.
Well, we have to stop that right now. Right, but you're looking for those anomalies. Are there a lot of failed login attempts? Why are we having 500 failed login attempts per minute? Well, it's clearly some sort of an automated system. Right? So reviewing the audit logs, detective control, right? You're looking for something after the fact. It's not going to prevent anyone. Just having audit logs isn't going to prevent someone from trying to log in or doing something. It's going to be after the fact. And again, can't prevent all bad things. So we got to detect and respond. And if you have good logging, it makes detection a lot shorter. Right? I think we've talked about with the average length. I think we'll talk incident response too, but we'll talk here. The average time a company is breached to the time they identify the breach. I don't have any guess on how long that is right now, ballpark.
6 to 8 months.
Yeah, it's like 190 days, somewhere right in 100, 200 days. So yeah, that's a long time. You can get a lot done in that time. We had one that they were breached in at least back to April of 18 and February. It's as far back, April of 18 was as far back as their logs went, which is still pretty good, and they were breached at that point. So we want to be able to detect. How can we do that? Good logging is a good way. All right, NIST 892. This is a really good thing to follow in terms of what should we be logging. I think a big one, it's not necessarily on here within Windows, though, is PowerShell. Right? PowerShell logging is not turned on by default, which kills me. And then you can do everything in PowerShell. So why are we not logging this? Anyway, so what are we looking at though? Security, software and hardware, antivirus logs, IDS, IPS, any VPN. And as you look through it, what is that going to tell you? Well, it's going to show you basically the play-by-play of what happens in a breach, right? If you are managing all these things, okay, when did they get in? Remote access, did they get in through VPN? Oh, no, it started on this endpoint, and here's the antivirus logs where it identified it, or the IDS, IPS logs, right? So you could really put this all together at that point. But yeah, if you want to look at what should be logged, NIST 892. Very important, centralized logging. This is important to know on this one. So it's the log retention. Right? I'd rather have it put into a central database than event logs on however many servers you have, however many workstations you have. It's a lot easier to manage. Legal regulatory compliance. So if you have it on 200 individual devices, that's going to be really difficult if you get a e-discovery, which we'll talk about, request. If I have one central location, I can ensure nobody has messed with this, and I can put a hold in it so it doesn't get overwritten.
How often would you say, just from your experience, that this is actually being done correctly?
Very rarely.
Yeah, it's kind of a maturity thing. I mean,
Yeah.
what, if you got a lot of other issues you need to deal with, this isn't going to be the one you're going to deal with right away.
Yeah, it's good to have. I think a lot of times you'll see people put in some sort of a log aggregation or put in a SIM solution and then just say, yep, I've got it, but they don't ever tune it. They don't ever get alerts. They don't do anything with it. Well, it's not plug and play, right? We need to actually understand how it works and configure it. Very big one for a centralized logging, log protection. So integrity and availability. When you're setting that up, you should have a separate username outside of the domain. A lot of times you'll set it up as a standalone with its own credentials. Why? If somebody compromises your domain, you don't want them compromising your logs as well. So you have to give them another piece to have to get through. And it verifies so there's your integrity, and then availability, it's up. So even if your domain is taken down or the server is down, you still have the availability of those logs. They're not able to erase them after the fact. So SIM is a overarching, so it's looking at log protection, aggregation, correlation, and then reporting. So just know there is different pieces. You might hear centralized logging or SIM. Centralized logging is a portion of SIM. All right, so now software testing methods. And developers, no, everybody's blank stares. This actually isn't too bad. We'll get through this. So high level static testing, right? We talked about it just very briefly. Software's not running. It's going to be a static code review, looking for software to do it. We'll go through it. Dynamic testing is while it's executing. White box, same as white hat. Right? We have full access to the architecture, and we're looking for bugs or weaknesses. Black box, they're not given any information. What can you do with this? Traceability matrix, so requirements matrix. Well, you'll see an example of this, but it's basically saying, here's the test plan and here are the customer's requirements and how do they map out. So you can ensure that you're actually meeting all of their requirements and gives them ability to see what you're doing and how that satisfies their requirements. Fuzzing, so black box is going to be like you're just entering random malformed data into an input and seeing what happens. You're trying to crash it. So you'll see that a lot. In the web application testing, it's the biggest one where we do that. And then combinatorial software testing. Every type of combination that we can put in, we're going to put in. All right, so static testing, you will need to know what static testing is. Passive code testing. It's static. The code is static while we're testing it. It's just the easy way to remember that. We're not executing the program. It's just a walkthrough line by line. Do we find anything in there? Syntax bugs, grammar, or I'm sorry, the code review. Yeah, so there's a list of tools for static code analysis. There's companies that'll do that. But yeah, that's all you have to know about static testing. The code is not active. We're just looking for syntax, really. So there's a couple of places that can do that static code analysis. It's easy, right? See? All right, so this is that traceability matrix. And you can see you've got, maybe, where's my pointer? For everyone online. So the requirement, public facing, whatever, and then which of these tests, what are we testing against those, right? So you have your color code, requirement 2005 and test case 2041 are connected, so you can, it's really just a way to track what's being done against a list of requirements from the software. All right, everyone got it? All right, you guys are too quiet. We're gonna be done in no time. That's what it is. We need Evan to distract.
Fun
Make it last. Yeah.
Not.
Synthetic transaction. So in this case, what we're trying to do is simulate activity. So you have software that's going to test the application as if it was a user, right? So what are the baselines or performance metrics? We're gonna, run a script against a web application and test the back end. It's going to simulate X number of transactions per second, per minute, whatever it is. What is that baseline? Because that's what we're going to be comparing it against. So it's just a simulated usage of the application, so we know what to expect when it's actually in production. Right. We used to do that. I didn't do dev testing, but you would do it for preparation for big events. Right? What is our baseline? What do we need? We know historically this happens. Do we need to ramp up? Right? Think about like Black Friday, or I know I worked for a jockey club which does thoroughbred racing down in Lexington. Well, what do you think the biggest race day, the biggest heaviest traffic days of the year are? Triple Crown, right? So you have to do some testing anytime you do any sort of new application deployment, because we knew historically what it would hit. Can we set a baseline? What do we need to scale to for these bigger days? So you're just prepping for where are we at for standard and moving up. All right, software testing, unit testing. So we're looking at actual functions, procedures, objects within the application, specific units in there, very low level. Integration, installation, testing it as it's installed and first pulled up. So, you install the software, it comes up and say, oh, this is your first time doing these things. It's testing that, making sure everything works properly. Integration, so, you might have multiple sets of software. How do they integrate with each other? If I have a database server and a web application server, and how do these all play together? Do they integrate well? Regression, going back after an update, modification, does it still work? Can I still do all the things I'm supposed to be doing? And then acceptance testing is a big one, meets the customer's requirements. So when the customer does it, they've accepted the results, right? So anytime you have software, you do an update, you should have a test plan for the customer end user, whoever your business unit is. They should run through their test plan and accept and document that. Saves you so much hassle when something breaks later, and you can prove that they signed off on it and it's not on you. All right, so fuzzing. Again, malformed data inputs into software programs. We're looking for the boundary checking for buffer overflows. Right, so can I just throw something out there and crash the application? Make it do something it's not supposed to do. Could be command line switches, environmental variables, program inputs. So have you ever seen that? Was it the XKCD with little Bobby tables, colon, backslash, drop tables, or whatever it is? Yeah, that's a kind of an example of that, where you're putting a command into an input and seeing if it'll actually execute or not. So if you want to look about fuzzers, there you go. Burp Suite, that's a good one. It's one of the kind of the better known ones for web app testing or application testing. But yeah, fuzzing, malformed data into the inputs. There you go. You can get the community edition, play around with it on your systems or wouldn't you have approved access to.
Kind of important.
Yeah, you don't want to be testing this.
Don't do it at work.
No, that's a resume generating event.
Yeah.
All right, other testing terms you'll need to know, misuse case. So what are we doing? Are we taking some sort of an action against it that we shouldn't be doing? We're misusing that application, and what happens? Yeah, that's the output of it. So test coverage analysis, did we do everything? What is the coverage? What did we do? How do we cover all the different pieces of the test? Interface testing, that's an easy one. Just testing all the interfaces. What is it listening on? What is it exposing? It's a lot easier to say, not at 6:45. And then the combinatorial software. So we're going to identify and test all combinations of software inputs. So it's just literally going to be, let's test everything we can. It could be fuzzing, it could be some misuse case testing, it could be, all these different types. What can we do? You don't need to know how to do it, just what they are so you can identify those. All right. No, nice try. Everyone got excited for a minute. All right, so we're gonna get started on domain 7, security operations. I think this one is probably, that's probably my favorite one. It's the one I did the most. All right, so Security operations, there's a lot of this. So we're going to cover in domain 7, talk about administrative security, forensics, IR management, operational, preventative, and detective controls, asset management, continuity of operations, which is different than BCP and DRP, but what the BCP and DRP are, how to develop them, talk about backups, testing, training awareness, maintenance, and then some specific frameworks. So you're going to start to see, this is where we really start to see that duplication, because all those really technical pieces are part of security operations as well, right? So it's all the documentation around all those things we've talked about. All right, very important. You will need to know the difference between a BCP, so a business continuity plan, continuity of operations plan, and a disaster recovery plan. For the test, they are not interchangeable. So we'll talk through it a little more, but BCP is the long-term plan to ensure continuity of it. The continuity is how do we actually continue operating while there is a disaster? And DR is how are we going to recover from the disaster? More technical, more IT focused on the DR plan. So we'll go through those a little bit more. Yeah, collusion, it's important where 2 or more individuals are subverting it. So, there might be traditionally you got 2 keys you have to turn. Well, it takes both people. I'd have to convince Chad, hey, if we want to get into the vault, we both got to do this. All right, you will need to know all these, mean time between failures. How long will a new system be up before it fails? Mean time to repair is how long is it going to take to recover it. We'll talk about mirroring, the different RAID levels. Mirroring is going to be one of them. Striping will be another one. You will need to know all the different RAID levels. Well, not all of them, but we'll talk through the important ones, but kind of 0, 1, 10, 5, 6, 10, probably. Yeah. So we got a lot to cover on this one, in this domain, but I think for me, this was the easy one because this is what a lot of people do on a kind of a day-to-day ongoing basis. It's not specific, still kind of high level. All right, so administrative is how are we controlling people's operational access? Least privilege, minimum necessary, so only what we absolutely have to have. We talked about discretionary access controls a couple classes ago, and that's one of the levels or one of the ways to maintain least privilege. Mandatory access control is another one. So based on the clearance of subjects and classifications. The object has a top secret classification, and I only have a secret clearance. I can't see it. Right? See, the method for enforcing needed nodes is beyond reliance. You just have to have access to it. Right? What is the requirement for you? Why do you need access to this? There needs to be a business justification. There needs to be some reason behind it. We'll need to know separation of duties. So multiple people required to complete critical or sensitive transactions. Think of this, maybe wire transfers. That'd be a big one, right? You see a lot of this fraud going around right now. I can't request a wire transfer and approve it and execute it. Why? Well, that's a pretty big risk. I could do all of it if I was corrupt. So I could request it, Chad could approve it, and then Evan would actually execute it.
Check cutting.
Yeah, that's another big one.
Yeah, the business office.
So collusion would be where, right, if I can request it and Chad would actually do it, I would have to convince him, hey, by the way, you should break the law with me too. Right? It's a lot harder. So we'll just need to know collusion is 2 parties conspiring to undermine security.
A lot of times, like in collusion, if you're like banks and stuff, like rotation of duties and that kind of thing, mandatory vacations are really important. So
that's next. Look at that. Go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, if you're performing a certain task and potentially you're actually, doing some kind of fraudulent activity by you actually going on vacation for a consecutive number of days, if Brad was doing that, then I have to slide in and actually do his job, I may actually catch that. So
we've seen it where in banks where somebody had to go on vacation and they identified years of fraud.
Yeah.
And that's what the whole point is. Typically, you also think of this as being the hit by bus or win the lottery, depending on if you're negative or positive outlook on life. I prefer the win the lottery. But from the exam, this is really important. It is an important control. However, you have to take cost into consideration. Right? What is the cost of having multiple people and forcing somebody to take 2 weeks off outside of their normal vacation, right? Because they don't get to pick it. If you have a rotation of duties well, we'll talk about forced vacation on the next slide, but you come in and they say, hey, Chad, great, good to see you today.
Yep.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Right.
You get paid for it, but you're not allowed to go in and do any work because they don't want you to know here. They don't want you to know and cover up your tracks. So you'll see this at larger organizations, larger banks, they have this. But
mainly the financial side that does it?
Not necessarily, but
Pretty
that's
a lot of times where you see it.
yeah, but
That's where I've seen it, and not that often.
Yeah.
Only the larger ones.
Yeah.
Let's say, oh, so-and-so's not here, yeah, he's on vacation, mandatory vacation, and they're cut off from everything. They're not checking in.
Yeah, they like disable the account,
Yeah.
basically. You were not.
You're kind of in an island of it, so you're really unplugging, so to speak.
But yeah, I think financial is probably the biggest one for sure. Insurance, maybe healthcare a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But typically, I think you see this mostly in financial and banking. So the whole point is, right, so you have a rotation, you could rotate around. I'm doing job A for this 3 months, and then I go to job B and Chad comes into job A. And you'd have multiple people kind of rotating through. And it identifies fraud or
That's more cost
misuse.
effective too, because now you're actually cross-training people, and
Yeah.
if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, from a operational type thing.
So going back to this, in the exam, if it does say, maybe it would say that it would require hiring an additional person at this cost, but the risk is this, what do you do? Right, so if it costs $50,000 to hire somebody and the risk of the fraud is $25,000 and you only expect it to happen once a year, it's actually not worth that cost. You would accept that risk. So it's something to keep in the back of your head. Cost is something you should take into consideration when you're doing taking the exam. Yeah, so mandatory leave, forced vacation, we talked about that. Depth of coverage is lacking, discovering fraudulent, suspicious behavior. And then another one is a little bit of a preventative, potentially, or deterrent, I should say, not preventative, a deterrent. If I know at some point I'm going to be forced to take 2 weeks off and I'm not going to be told when that's going to happen, if I was tempted to do something, maybe I don't do it now. All right, so you're hopefully deterring somebody from even doing that, knowing likelihood of them getting caught goes up. All right, non-disclosures. So it's where we have a contract saying that before we share information, we have an agreement. I'm not going to share this outside of the company, that it is confidential between us. Job candidates before they're hired, that's a big one, right? Because you don't want somebody coming in and getting your sensitive information and then going across the street and selling it. Gives you some sort of a legal leg to stand on. Consultants, contractors, we have NDAs with every client. Why? It's kind of that assurance that we're not going to sell their information, or we'll protect it. All right, everybody's familiar with NDAs. And you know about background checks, this is important. Should be done as part of the pre-employment screening. It should be done based on the sensitivity of the information the person has access to. Right, so maybe you do a criminal background check against all your employees, but if they're going to be in accounting or finance, they also get a credit check. Right? Or if they're going to be an executive, if they have the ability to do make these calls or approve transfers or make decisions like that, you'd want to take a larger or a deeper dive into their background. Yeah, it should be ongoing, just because we did it once at, 10 years ago when you were hired. You've had, 12 DUIs. Something we should be aware of, especially if you're a delivery driver, right? So it's not a once and done, it needs to be ongoing. Ahead of time is a preventative control, and then ongoing are detective, potentially deterrent. If you know you're gonna have, think of this as like the, I think all kind of along the lines of, if I do this and I get an arrest record, I'm gonna lose my job. I know they're gonna check and they're gonna catch me. I can't hide it.
What's the reason they do like post-employment checks?
Um,
If you quit and now you've got $500,000 in your bank account before you started, you didn't not get paid that much, is in that sense, or?
No, I think on that one, it would be more, I'm trying to think what a good example that would be.
Yeah, I was thinking more like from, yeah,
I don't know if I've ever seen a post-employment one.
no.
Maybe if you fired somebody for fraud or you suspected them and then suddenly they bought a giant house that they could never have afforded on salary, something like that, you would maybe want to look and check on, suspicious, unexpected behaviors outside of, related to their employment with you.
The other thing I was going to make a mention of is on the slide prior to that, the NDA. They sign that NDA when they are, you're going to hire them, but then when someday there maybe not be, they won't be an employee, they put a notice in. So you want to make sure that that's reviewed again. Remember this paper, you signed that. Just because you don't get a check from us anymore doesn't mean you can go, review what you know.
Yeah, post-employment, if you have a non-compete, which, whether it's enforceable or not, but that would be something you would possibly check for is, hey, you quit and said you wouldn't go work for our client, and then you go work for the client, or, something like that. Privilege monitoring. So what's going on, right? What are people doing? Who has access to these sensitive job functions? You want to make sure who can create accounts. You want to control that. You want to verify that the people that are actually have that permission, have that privilege, are the ones that should. People aren't getting added to it. There's not somebody who was fired that can still, access cloud configurations or anything like that. All right, digital forensics. So this is going to be, forensics closely related to incident response. It's the formal investigation piece. So evidence handling, the documentation. When you're doing incident response to digital forensics, it's going to take you longer to document what you did than actually execute. That's how you know you're doing it right. If you're going faster than you're documenting, it's not good. Think of this as preserving the crime scene. Let's go on. Hang on, there's more here. So when we're doing that, right, unintentional modification of the system, we're trying, when you do a digital forensics, you always make a copy of it. Right? We don't want to mess with the original. We want to investigate the copy. That way, if something happens, we can go back and show, hey, we didn't change it, or if they challenge in court, you can say, no, it's the same values, you can hash the system, right? Hash the original, hash your copy, hash it again, and show nothing has changed. This is what I found. And at forensics, it's basically exactly what it sounds like. It's what activity can I take to make the forensics difficult? Can I hide anything? Malware that's memory resident. So if you turn off the laptop or the computer or the system that's infected or reboot it, it's gone. There's no logs, there's no evidence of it. It was only in memory. We're seeing a lot more of that starting to happen.
It's usually people's panic, it's like pull the cord.
Pull the power. No, just disconnect the network.
Right.
Isolate it. Live forensic capture. So, when you're doing that, it's going to be real time, right? We're actually capturing maybe network traffic, things like that. When you're coming, you're going to do a binary image. You want to do that as your exact replica. So you'll need to know a bit or binary image. Backup software only capturing active partitions. So just, bit level, we're going to copy everything on that drive or on that system, right? And then examine that. If we're examining a backup, backups only get what's active. We've already talked about data remnants, right? I deleted it, but it's still on the drive. Backup wouldn't show that. So when we're doing a forensic investigation, we want a bit level image of that, or binary image of that. All right, so there's the 4 types of data allocated. Hey, we've got stuff here. The OS or whatever you're using says there's active data on this section. Unallocated, it's not containing active. So this is where it's either going to be never allocated before, or it's been marked unallocated. It's been deleted from the OS, but it's not been overwritten yet. Yeah, so it's unallocated, but it's still available. Kind of, like I said, starting to see a lot of the things come back around. Slack space. So a cluster is the minimum size that can be allocated by a file system. If it does not use the entire system piece, that's that slack space. Things can hide in there. So think if you've got 64, just easy, 64-bit clusters, and you have a file that's, 100 bits, well, you have 28 left over. That's the slack space, right? Because it's going to write to 2 64-bit chunks. Well, I got to fill up that last bit or last piece. So that's the last space, slack space. It can be used by attackers to hide information in there. And then bad blocks, cluster sectors. So physical defect no longer works. So everyone's done the disk health checker on their machine. How many bad clusters or sectors are left or on there? One thing to keep in mind, you can intentionally mark those sectors as bad to hide them from the OS. The OS just ignores them. If it's marked as a bad one, they ignore it. You can then use that to hide data on that you can pull. Any questions on those 4 types? Okay. All kinds of tools to create the binary backup. DD and WinDD are free. Ghost, FTK, Incase. Incase is kind of I think a pretty good one for that. But yeah, what you want to do, identify what your evidence is going to be. Acquire it. Chain of custody is very important. We're going to analyze it and then do a report. So when you have a forensic investigation, those are the 4 parts. Again, hashing algorithms are used to verify integrity. So before I do a copy, I'm going to hash that image. It's going to give me a unique ID, that unique hash, right? We don't really care about going back. It's not, we're just verifying what is the output. Do the image and run it again, hash it again. And that's the way you can show I have an exact copy. Nothing has changed. Yeah, and then whenever possible, you shouldn't use the original media for analysis. If you do, sometimes you have to, but you would have to hash it and then hash it again to show nothing's changed. If something changes, kind of hoping for the best at that point. All right, so live forensics, so traditionally removing the power from the system, right? Oh, this was investigated. Here's a hard drive and hand it over. There's no power to it. Live forensics is active. Well, the system is up and running, right? So maybe some, again, running network, running tools against the actual application or the system while it's still powered on and active. Metasploit will do it. I don't think you need to do no, excuse me, Metasploit specifically, but it can do live forensics. It's really cool. It's fun to play with if you haven't tried it. Yeah, Metasploit Meta-interpreter is a big payload hashing of a system dumped to the attacker's machine, and then you can feed those hashes to a cracker. So you can use Metasploit to get on, use Meta-interpreter to dump the payload or the password hashes, and then crack it offline. You're not on the system anymore. Yeah, the PSExec module, which is fantastic if you're an admin and a nightmare if you're an admin. So something that's kind of an example of that. Meta-interpreter, some additional features, command execution, can upload, download files, screen capture, keystroke logging, all open source. They keep updating it. It is a really cool tool. So there you go, that's what that looks like. And I'll have password hashes of admin, guest, and the user account. Now I just run this through a password cracker. It's just a matter of time. Yeah, detection, invasion in mind. That third bullet point, that's a big one. You can do all this without changing the victim system. There's no logs, there's no new files created. It's all done this remotely in memory. And so it's in process, there's nothing. If you detect it and power off, there's no evidence that there was anything ever on there. So that's a kind of that example. Physical memory rather than on hard drive. So that's an example of what that looks like. Yeah, putting in a back door. Yay. All right. So live forensics, if you're being attacked by Metasploit Meta-interpreter, if I remove power, it's gone. Right? Everything was in active memory. There's no evidence. So we need to remove the network, leave it up, sever the connection, but leave memory running. So then you can come in with a tool and actually look at the live system and see what's going on in memory. Okay, so network forensics, study of data in motion. Big one, preservation of evidence for presentation in court. Anytime you do any sort of forensics incident work like that, you have to assume that it's going to be challenged by the opposing counsel. So we need to make sure that we've gathered this information, we have chain of custody, we are preserving it, and it will be presented in court. This could be, email conversations, chats, any web activities, file transfers, anything that happens on a network, communication across the network. All right, so there's a couple of different types here. So software analysis, forensic software analysis is basically trying to reverse engineer malware. What's going on with it? What does it do when it actually is executing? Right, so you run this on a VM. You don't want to run this on your actual system. You run it on a virtual machine that has no network connectivity, and you watch and see what happens. What's it doing? What files is it writing? What is the activity? And that's how they start writing, the signatures for these. So then just know forensic software analysis is deconstructing malware or other software, and then you detonate it and watch and see what it does. Embedded device forensics, so looking at IoT or handheld requires specialized tools. Not everything, those have cables or plugs you have to actually connect into sometimes. Special tools for any one of those ones that are on the network. Just embedded device, so cameras, ATMs, any of those embedded types of devices could be included in that. All right, e-discovery. you're looking for, this is legal, right? So it's going to be, there's a case against you if somebody has filed a lawsuit. You need to hold this information. We need to see a copy of everything you have electronically around typically specific keywords or phrases. So electronic information during pre-trial discovery, electronically stored information. One of the big things here is it does not have to be conveniently accessible or transferable, but you may need to know about it. So there's certain rules around that saying, around your data retention, what are your legal, you have to have a defined retention policy. So we keep 90 days available and up to a year offsite in cold storage. Well, if you get any discovery request, you can say, yeah, I can give you the last 90 days of that pretty quickly. If you need the other, it's going to take time. It's not conveniently accessible or transferable. There's going to be work involved with that. But at the end of the day, e-discovery, when you get an e-discovery request, you have to do what you can to preserve all evidence related to that request. And you don't want to mess with the courts by not complying. Anybody had to go through e-discovery before? It's not fun. Have you done that?
Not in a formal sense, but yeah, there's been times where, yeah. And that's where, everyone wants to keep everything. They want to keep every single
It's a double-edged sword on that one too.
Exactly.
I have a quick question. So like we had e-discovery and they requested an email box, but then they asked for us to have it in like an Outlook format. We don't use Outlook. I guess where are the bounds?
That's where you let your lawyers handle that and say, here's what we have it, but it's not, here's everything you have. You figure out how to read it, right? So, but ultimately that's the lawyers that will be the ones that decide if you're gonna go that extra mile or not. Typically they're gonna tell them.
I mean, we don't need to make it convenient for them.
I mean, you have all the information, it's just, it's not in their preferred format.
I mean, if you start wanting weird stuff like Firebird or something, or Thunderbird, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it ultimately comes down to the lawyers.
That should be, that's up to them.
If you get an e-discovery request, your first call should be to legal counsel. Let them know, because they're the ones that are gonna run that. All right, and then let them fight with the other side and figure out what exactly you need.
Office 365 has, like a e-hold or legal hold or whatever. So you just put that into place and it kind of locks everything.
And then figure out what you're gonna actually transfer.
Yeah.
But yeah, as soon as you get it, you have to freeze, you can't destroy anything. So you need to know where your data is and what you have. Been through several of those. All right, incident response management. So everybody will have incidents. It's reality. Severity of the incidents is where we hopefully keep it pretty minor, but incident response management, it's regimented tested methodology for how do we identify and respond to security incidents. That's what it's all about. You'll hear that computer security incident response team, CSIRT. So that's who's going to be responsible for monitoring and responding to incidents. Again, overall goal, ideally, we can't prevent incidents from happening. You can only hope to detect them and contain them faster. It's really the goal of an incident response plan is we're prepared for when this happens. We're going to catch it sooner, contain it faster, minimize the impact. All right, so important on there. There's all kinds of terms and phrases, and you could go to 10 companies and get 10 different definitions. Very important in this is what is in the exam. So regardless of what you see, maybe in your business life, these are the ones this is what you need to remember. So preparation, an incident is inevitable. We need to define what's the difference between an event and an incident. And then who's going to do what, when are they, or how are they going to do it, when are they going to do it? So we need to be able to say, events on a network, could be failed logins. That's an event. It only becomes an incident when there's over a certain number. So yeah, 2 or 3 failed logins, those are incidents, or I'm sorry, events. 500 in a 5-minute window, now we've got an incident. We need to actually investigate. So we need to define the difference. What's an event and what's an incident? All right, so detection, I can't prevent everything. All right, it's just not realistic. So if I can't prevent it, can I detect it? Events analyzed to determine whether these might compromise a security incident. A lot of this is around detective. So this is where your antivirus, IDS, IPS, SIM solutions, all those types of things would lie, right? They're alerting you something's happened. It's not stopping it, it's maybe after the fact, this changed, right? So again, I can't prevent everything, so how quickly can I detect it? All right, so the next step, containment. So once you detect something, what do we do with it? Right. This needs to be, again, we're trying to contain it, right? Think of it, a virus spreading. How do we stop the spread? What are the right activities to take on this? Now, this is where an incident response plan is really important because there's so many different potential incidents. Well, what do we do in each of those? That's why we test it. Do we take the system off the network? Do we isolate the traffic? What are we going to do? Well, that comes back to our preparation. I need to know if an incident comes up, who's going to do what, and what are they going to do? So you go through and start testing these different things. Containment is where the forensic backup is made, which seems counterproductive or counterintuitive, right? You typically would think, well, maybe after I've contained. No, that's part of the containment phase is the forensic backup. So once we've contained it and we understand we have it under control, what was the cause and how are we going to clean this up, right? The biggest part of this is what was the cause of the incident? So what's the full scope of what I'm dealing with here? Once we stop the spread, what are we dealing with? Very important, cause must be determined before recovery. Why is that? How many times have we seen, all right, we cleaned up the virus and go back to production and a week later they're infected again? Because they didn't find the root cause. There's still persistence mechanisms on the network. Well, they didn't know about those. They only found the active ones. So eradication, you have to understand root cause. What caused this? What are we dealing with? Now, once we understand the full cause, or I'm sorry, what the full root cause was, now we can start recovery. And then recovery is the restoration of systems. So, yeah, once you come back on, business unit is going to say, okay, yep, we've recovered it and tested it and verified it's ready to go. It can go online. Anytime you have anything being brought back up, you need to make sure you have additional monitoring in place. Just because you think you have that, you've identified the root cause, maybe you missed the persistence mechanism, maybe something happens. Is there performance issues? Do we have everything in place? So additional monitoring after being returned to production is key.
Someone online asked, it's a good question actually, if the incident response plan would be done during the assessment. You're going to identify that you maybe need one or don't have one,
or that it's lacking.
It's going to be a separate.
It would be process. Reviewed as part of the assessment, but it would not be creating it. You would want to have your incident response plan separate out of that security assessment. Security assessment would identify weaknesses in the plan. So reporting, this is a big one. A lot of times, you see an incident happens and then that's the end of it. There's no, here's what happened, here's the narrative of the story of when we found it, what we did, what the impact was. recommendations for improvement moving forward. Yeah, final report delivered to management. So this is a lot of times is overlooked. So you have a malware investigation, it was on one system, they just wipe it and restart, and there's no reporting. Well, management needs to know, right? There needs to be a formal reporting process in place. So that's it. So for the NIST 800-61R2, it is fantastic. Gives you that 4-step life cycle. Has a bunch, and I think it's Appendix A, a bunch of example scenarios with questions. So if you want to learn more about incident response, it's a really, really good document to understand what those steps are. And also, if you're doing an IR tabletop, you've got, you'll have to customize it, but it's a really good resource to go and say, hey, all right, here's the scenario and here are the things we should be looking at. So it kind of helps you get into that mindset. All right, so methodology. Exam, it has 7 steps. We talked about preparation, detection or identification, response or containment, mitigation or eradication, reporting. We need to go recovery, remediation, and then the book has lessons learned, which to me is absolutely critical for a successful IR program. So go through this a little bit more in depth. We already talked about quite a bit of this, but when you're looking at it from the exam perspective, this is what we need to know. So your incident response policy procedures, any of the tools that you would need, the original media, everything you need to be prepared for that incident. Again, the biggest one is policies and procedures, I think, right? Without that, that's what drives the program. Policy state gives somebody that responsibility to actually create the program. Procedures are, here's what we're going to do in the event. Now, you'll never have a perfect IR plan, DR plan, BCP. You just never will. But it's better to have something than nothing, and then continue to mature it as you go. That's why the lessons learned, why the tabletops are so important.
Defensibility.
Yep. So incident handling checklist, other forms of tracking. Are you doing any sort of, how are you doing your classification? How are you doing your impact? Right. Try to show something. So funny enough, Evan does these slides, so we've switched, so he'll do it for me. And I was like, what is he talking about? I have no idea. So I had to go back and I pulled up last year's slides, and he had note to Evan, show something, and then forgot to put something in there. So he just changed it to my name. However, I did actually read them. So I'm prepared for what he forgot last year. All right, so incident handling, logging, categorization tool. This is something that Evan's created under Creative Commons. Just kind of goes through how to classify, what are the steps, right? How do we classify it? What are they classified? How do we notify? So this is something that we'll have Brandon send a link out to. I think it's out on our website. But if anybody's interested, I'll make sure he sends a link to where to download this tool. Just goes through all the different classifications based on, not the type of incident, how many records are impacted or users are impacted, the sensitivity of it. Workbooks maybe? Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so it's under incident response, incident handling, logging, categorization tool. So it's out there, but actually remember, see, he was trying to catch me. I'm too good for that. All right. But it's really important, so I'm gonna actually go back here, hold on. Without knowing classification and impact, how do you know how you should be responding? Right? It's really critical to know that. So when we go through it, what are again, defining what's an event, defining what's an incident, understanding how to properly categorize an incident. Those are really the critical pieces to starting the program. Once you have that in place, now you can say, okay, if this happens at this level, here's what needs to happen. Which is what this is about, right? So Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, what are the different types? What's the different criticality, different sensitivity? Based on your answers to those things, you then have low, medium, or high classification. How are we defining it? Right? If it's a low classification, we don't need to invoke the incident response team. We just need to log it that it happened. Maybe that's phishing attacks for less than 5 people. Nobody actually clicked, but a bunch of people actually responded or reported that they got the same email. That would probably be an incident in my opinion. And if you get the same exact one to people, you want to investigate that and see what's going on. But nobody clicked. There was no actual damage. Medium, do we need a formal response, or high, are we invoking the incident response team with some SLAs around that? All right, detection or identification. So what are all the inputs into my incident response process? So what are we looking at? What am I pulling in? IDS logs, IPS logs, antivirus, system logs, event logs. That's how we're detecting what's going on. Another one for detection, user reports. Right? What are the users telling you? If people are reporting, my computer, every time I open up the web browser, it goes to this weird site. Well, it's an event that comes in. You need to take that data and then determine, does it rise to the level of an incident? So it's so important in the preparation to define the difference between event and incident. Response or containment. So this is going to be your step-by-step. What are we doing? If this happens, do A, B, C, and D. Do we need to go to forensics? Does it was there PHI involved over a certain number of records? Whoop, timeout. That requires a separate response. Right, so that's that step-by-step. It's part of that classification. It's really, you try to do the best you can on this, and it's not going to ever be perfect, but just understand kind of what these are. And this is the start of your root cause analysis. You're starting to pull all that information that you've gotten and say, okay, it's an incident. We'll start trying to correlate some of that information. Mitigation. So after we've completed our root cause analysis, hopefully completed, we can eradicate or mitigate, get rid of it. So we've contained it, identified how it got in. Now we're going to fix it and prevent it and clear it out. Right? These are the files we have to delete off of every computer. This is the services we need to look for. This is the web traffic to this IP over these ports that we know are indicators of the compromise. Now we can take steps to clean it up. Reporting, not actually a step, it does happen, right? So when we're doing an incident response, daily check-ins, we're reporting to whoever is impacted. Here's what we found, here's what's going on. There's always constant communication, but then we need a formal report. So you would write out, hey, all right, here's your executive summary and then technical details of what exactly we found, which would lead to really the kind of tied into the lessons learned. But recovery is actually bringing those systems back online. We've cleaned them, we feel they're clean, we're gonna now put them back into production, but we need to increase our monitoring on it. So, you can see a little bit different from those 4 steps from the NIST to what the book or the exam is looking at. And then remediation, broader context. So, what are additional steps that maybe we could take? Multi-factor, putting a centrally managed antivirus in place. So kind of the additional remediation to prevent this from happening in the future. And then lessons learned. What did we learn? This is probably one of the more missed pieces out of disaster recovery, business continuity, incident response, whatever continuity of operations. We'll go through a lot more of those next time, and it's really important to know the difference, but do your lessons learned. You will always learn something from whatever happens. Tabletop, actual incident, actual disaster. Make sure you have a lessons learned in place and actually act on it, right? Change the steps in your plan. do these things.
We don't wait too long to do it.
Yeah, don't wait too long. So I told you this was easy, right? This was an easy class. Look at that. We'll do more questions. Don't worry. We're not letting you go early. Come on. You didn't have it that easy. Make sure you catch up, right? I think this one is probably one of the easier ones. It's practical. A lot of this is, oh, okay, yeah, I've done that. I've heard that. It's more learning what is the exam looking for. You got to remember, real world does not equal the book or the test. So you just got to be able to kind of change what you do maybe in reality and satisfy what they're looking for. All right. We'll do more quiz. I just have to get logged in. Give me just a second here. Maybe. If it wants to work. Or if I could tape my password, that would help too.
Better hurry up, you're losing people online. One just dropped.
Man, tough crowd. Let's see.
So everyone learning a lot? Yeah.
It actually does get easier now, because this is more of the, hey, this is what I get it. I'm
build the
doing
foundation.
All right. All right. So let's do a new quiz. Should we do it in study mode or test mode? Let's do it in study mode. All right, we're going to test you on what you learned today. Let's do 15 questions on this. See it okay?
Yep.
All right. Which of the following best stress test would provide the best stress test environment for taking under consideration avoiding possible data exposure and leaks of sensitive data? Which of the following would provide the best stress testing environment? So we want to do, hey, what we're setting a baseline, what can our system actually handle, but we don't want to actually expose any data or leak sensitive information. So a test environment using test data, can you guys read that okay? Zoom in?
Yeah. I think so.
All right, test environment using test data, test environment using sanitized live workloads data, production environment using sanitized, oh no, production right away we know is a no-go, right? So as we do, we'll go through it, right? Typically a lot of times there's two questions or two answers you're gonna be able to eliminate right away. Well, here's a good one. So
Number one.
do we wanna use test data or do we wanna use sanitized live data?
Test data, because you don't want to leak exposed sensitive data, it says in the question.
So you've got sanitized here.
B.
So the way I would go D, or I'm sorry, B, because I want to know, I'm doing a stress test of actually what's in there. Your test data may not actually represent what's in live. It's going to avoiding possible data exposure and leaks of sensitive. All those people could see is where you're going to get, you can talk yourself out of it because did they sanitize it correctly? I'm going to stick with B.
Pressure's on.
I know, right? Well, I never want to take this exam again. I'm going to keep my CPEs up.
Yeah.
Too much stress. Yeah, so live data, sanitized. So again, you can't guarantee the test data is going to be representative of what is actually going to happen in the system. All right. Which of the following can be defined as the process of rerunning a portion of the test scenario or test plan to ensure changes or corrections have not introduced new errors? Well, we just talked about that one. That's a gimme. Regression testing. So unit testing, low level, right? We're gonna test specific objects or portions of it. Pilot testing, I'm not sure what that is. We didn't talk about that. Parallel testing, I guess you could test it in parallel. I don't know. These two are the ones that I immediately go, oh, I've seen those definitions. I need to know which of these two it is. Regression testing. All right, which of the statements pertaining to software testing approaches is correct? Top-down approach allows errors in critical modules to be detected earlier. We didn't talk about this one. Bottom-up approach, allowing interface errors to be detected earlier. So top-down, finished product, working our way back down. Bottom-up, we're starting at the back end and working towards the user interface. To me, those two are backwards. Top-down would allow interface earliers. Bottom-up would allow critical modules to be detected earlier. Test plan results should be retained as part of the system's permanent documentation. That's pretty good. And then black box testing is predicated on a close examination of procedural detail. Now, I'm going to go with this one. So top-down approach is going to start with the user interface. What does the user see? We're going to test our way back. Bottom-up, we're going to start with those critical modules and identify issues in advance. And really, with those two approaches, what's your end goal? Where are you starting at? Okay. Oh, that's a lot of reading. Okay. I'm not worried all that. You guys can read it. No. Okay, so read through the whole thing. There's one key phrase in there.
Okay.
Yeah. The big one here is compromised security, following someone who has legitimate access to the building. That's your key phrase. All right, identify incorrect statement from the following testing types. Recovery testing. So load testing is correct. Stress testing is correct. It's correct. I'm going to go with recovery testing as being incorrect. So load testing, I want to see what it can handle. What's the load it can do? Stress test, we're going to incrementally up. All right, so we're going to start at 10 users, 20 users, 30. At what point do we stress it out? And then volume, same thing, just with volumes of records. And recovery testing, does not ring a bell. So there you go. See, you guys are answering all these great. All right, which of the following is a penetration test where the penetration tester provided limited or no knowledge? Well, that's a horrible question because that's not even correct. It would be blind testing, but that's not what the phrases are. It would be black box, right? No knowledge, zero knowledge. All right, which of the following recovery sites is least expensive and most difficult to test? We didn't go through, that wasn't even in that domain.
No.
I got misclassified. Well, we haven't got to that yet. Okay, so you have cold sites. That is going to be a location with no equipment on it. Warm site, it'll be a location with equipment there, but it's not up and running. You're going to have to do some sort of a backup or prep to bring it up into production. A mobile hot site is going to be everything is ready to go. They're going to bring it to you perhaps, but it's going to be real-time ready hot site. It's flip over in hours. Or a non-mobile hot site, which is at a colo location or separate data center. So in this case, least expensive, most difficult to test would be cold site. It's just you're renting space. If I have a disaster, I need to come up, I'm going to have to get equipment, get network connectivity, but at least I have somewhere to go to. Oops, I should probably answer that so we can so I can get my credit. That'd be good. This is more fun than lecturing, right?
Yeah.
Is it helpful to hear the thought process behind looking through this? Okay.
It's definitely an elimination,
Yeah.
process.
I think a lot of it comes down to how do you think, right? How am I looking at this exam? What are the keys that I'm looking at? What do we need to consider? All right, biometric system trying to recognize the user based on patterns of blood vessels and back of the inside of the user's eye. So eliminate mind mapping, handwriting dynamics. So it's either retina pattern matching or iris recognition. Well, iris is right. So iris being the color. So here, I'm gonna test you guys. It's not on here. What's the risk with, or what's the downside of concern around retina scanning that you have to be aware of?
Privacy.
Privacy.
And also transfer of fluids.
Transfer, yep. All right, good. You guys actually pay attention on. All right. One risk of being a pen tester and security analyst is liability when things go wrong and something is damaged. What is the primary defense against such a liability? Insurance, good backups, avoid destructive testing measures, and blame it on hardware failure. Well, it's clearly D.
I think D, yeah.
No. So good backups, that's not going to help you. You're not, as a pen tester, you're not making backups of their systems. Avoiding destructive testing measures, and guarantee you, even if you do non-destructive, if a system is not stable, even though you've been told it's stable, you can take it down. Hardware failure, that's just not going to ever fly. I mean, I guess you could, but so insurance is going to be your big one. First step of any penetration test. Oh, we talked about it.
D.
D.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Good. All right, which of the following answers best describe the type of pen testing where the analyst has no knowledge on the network? Oh, there you go. That's much better. Black box. That's a much better question than the other one.
Getting back to that prior question, we see this a lot where, when we scope out projects and it's a repeat customer and they'll say, well, just do what you did last time. Do the network you did last time or whatever. And it's like, it's all the same. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to trust that. I want them to verify it.
Yeah.
If we do the wrong thing, how do I know what didn't change? We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, we get a lot of pushback, which is surprising to me. Like, oh, list out what you want tested. Just do what you did last year.
And they get kind of mad sometimes,
Yeah.
to be honest with you, like, because we're asking them.
No, it's all about reduction of risk. All right, which answer best describes the process? We break into our own systems by exploiting known vulnerabilities to determine if they are sufficiently secure from attack or if they can be successfully taken advantage of. Hacking, pen testing, escalation of privileges, or buffer overflow. So system hacking it's nothing. Pen testing, it sounds pretty good. Escalation of privileges, that's part of pen testing, and buffer overflow is a method of pen testing. So these two are subsidiaries of that one. I'm going with pen testing. All right, what web application testing technique involves sending random data to the app to see how it behaves? Fuzzing. Yeah, you're trying to. Yeah. I know. Well, see, that's where you got to be careful, right?
Yeah.
Because you
Pretty
look at
careful.
it and you're like, "Ooh, that's easy," and you're cool. Wait a minute. Input validation and buffer overflow, that's what you're checking with the fuzzing, right? Can you cause a buffer overflow? Do they have any input validation in place? All right, which of the following best describes the type of pen testing where the analyst only has partial knowledge? Gray box. Pink box, is that during like Mother's Day? Isn't that what they do? Like where they get all the athletes, or no, breast cancer awareness, get to wear the pink gloves for football and baseball? All right, cross-site scripting. So we didn't talk a lot about this or at all about this, but cross-site scripting, it tells you right there, using client-side code injection, they're executing malicious payload into a legitimate website. All right, Our site scripting can be classified into 3 major categories. What are they? I don't think you would ever need to know that level, but that's okay. So when I'm looking at this, my initial feeling is, no, it was B and C are out. 'Cause I'm not,
It's not decom, it's com. So many different between A and D's, Tom or decom.
right.
D.
Man, so it's at 50-50. And I'm not familiar, it's been a long enough time. I don't remember. No, I think it's decom. Is it?
Decom something else.
That's
I think it's D.
D. All right, we'll go with that. Oh, there you go. Good job. See how we got that one wrong. You don't have to be perfect.
Well, and you can't be an expert at everything either. And I made a comment online too. I mean, you know, sometimes we are hard on ourselves because we think we got to know everything, but the reality is you can't. I mean, I'm not a pen test. You won't want me to pen test.
Yeah.
I'd be very good at it. So.
You just need to know enough. I think that's good advice, right? Know enough that you know where to go. You understand what's being asked and where to get the correct information, and you'll be ahead of most people. But for the test.
For the test, you needed to, don't have to pass it, but yeah.
All right, submit. Okay. We know we got 100%. All right, should we do another quiz? Should we do it on about everything up until what we've done so far? So I won't do 7, but I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see the percentages there. That is based on IC squared's weighting. So it's how it's weighted for those. All right, 15 questions. So we'll get 1 or 2 per. That'd be good. Oh, all right. I'm not answering any of these questions. You guys have to come up with a consensus.
Okay.
There you go. Good. All right. Which layer defines how packets are routed between in systems?
Network, because it's routed.
Yep. Good. So that was in case online, network because it's routed. That's that key phrases, keywords you're looking for that trigger. All right, which layer of the TCP/IP protocol defines IP datagrams and handles the routing of data across the networks?
Wouldn't it be the same?
TCP/IP though. Remember that's the 4. I think it's the internet layer.
Because they screw the internet and the network on, so it confuses you.
Yeah, so that's a key one, right? Because if you're thinking OSI, you might just see network and go. High-level statements, beliefs, goals, and objectives. So we talked about this way back.
Guidelines?
Yep. I'll go with guidelines, right? Policy, this is what we're going to be doing. Procedure is how we're going to be doing it. Standards are what are the baselines we're doing this against, what should we be checking against. Guidelines are your high-level guidance. So if I can get the mouse to work, there. Oh, what? Oh, I read that wrong. Okay.
I think there's a blog post that talks about that, Brad.
Yeah. I misread that one. That's my fault. Oh, well.
There's a blog on
And
the FRSecure website. I think it's one of the most highly hit ones.
Beliefs,
That
goals,
talks about this kind of
objectives.
stuff. So.
All right, I won't argue it. I just don't like how that's written. See, everybody can miss them. All right. Which of the following is more suitable for hardware implementation? Well, we know it could be, yeah, I'm gonna not say anything. I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut. I'm gonna make you guys answer these. Got to see if you're paying attention.
Block cipher?
Stream.
There's two different, stream cipher, or, okay. Block cipher or stream cipher. So block chunks, stream is continuous, right? Got two answers, we need a consensus. Am I answering it? I got the last one wrong. I can't do that. I ruined my 100%. So we've eliminated electronic code book. Everybody agrees it's not that. Everybody agrees it's not cipher block chaining. So I think it's block cipher or stream cipher. Got 2 blocks. I need 1 more block. All right. Block cipher's got 3. Stream. Okay, so it's doing the mathematic as it goes. Yeah, or I'm sorry. Yeah. So you just need to know the difference there. It's all right. That's okay.
That's how you practice them over and over.
It's so much of this is gonna be repetition and just memorization of being able to, like I said, the network and routing, right? Just those key things. You don't necessarily need to know all the in-depth. You just need to be able to go, oh wait, it's being able to pick out those keywords and understand and go, okay, I know, I recognize that.
Procedures.
Step-by-step instructions, yes, I would agree with that one. If it's wrong, I'm quitting for the night. All right. What was developed by IEEE to replace radius? Ooh, this is a,
D. B is the Cisco proprietary,
Yeah.
so it can't be B.
Diameter.
I can see diameter.
radius plus doesn't exist that we were talking about, right? TACX and TACX plus are specific to Cisco, to a vendor. They're gonna stay agnostic.
Vendor neutral.
Yep. So I'm gonna go with diameter. So you just need, it's kind of what you
You
got.
kind of linked, I mean, from a term, like a word, association, radius diameter.
Yeah,
Use
There you
tricks
go.
like that.
I like it. All right. What of the following functionality is not performed by the application layer of the TCP/IP model? I'll call that out. Application layer of TCP/IP. So if you know the OSI model and know where these things happen, because that's what most people are familiar with, you just have to remember, how do they map across? For me, that was one of the areas I didn't do a lot of networking at that time, and it's been a while. So I'm kind of wrote the OSI model and then TCP right away, just so I didn't have to think about it. I knew the OSI, I wasn't as familiar with that. That's something I did to make it a little easier on myself, but what's not happening on the application layer?
End-to-end connection.
All right. Agree with that, because it's right. All right. Incorrect statement related to network performance. So what is bandwidth? Measured in bits per second, maximum rate of information that can be transferred. Error rate, number of error, corrupted bits expressed as a percentage or fraction of the total bits. Latency is the actual rate of information transferred over the network, or jitter is time of arrival at the receiving side, a variation of the time of arrival at the receiving side. So this one, so we know, so let's go through it, let's talk through it. So bandwidth, everyone agree with that? Bandwidth is what's your pipe? How much can I shove through? Well, that pretty well defines what can I shove through. Error rate is number of corrupted bits as a fraction of the total bits. Yeah. So latency is actual rate of information being transferred. No, latency is a delay in it.
Time.
Yeah, it's a time one. Yep. And jitter is actually correct. So I'm gonna go with latency. Latency being the delay, right? I sent it, I expected it to be 10 milliseconds and it was 50 milliseconds. There's latency in that connection. All right, huge long paragraph I'm gonna ignore. Which managerial best practice involves only giving users enough access to resources to perform their job function? So I don't even care about reading that paragraph. It's nice for somebody to write it though.
Least privilege.
Yep. Separation of managers. That's not a thing. Mandatory
That's
privilege.
a good idea.
Right, yeah. Job position sensitivity, none of those are even anything, so there you go, least privilege. SHA-1 creates, ooh, go back to the super fun cryptography section. SHA-1, the hash algorithm, what does it create? A message digest with a length equivalent to the input message, variable length message digest from a variable length input message, fixed length message digest from a variable length input message, variable length message digest from a fixed length input message. All right, yeah, all right. So we'll talk, everyone know why that's C? Do we want to talk through that real quick? Okay, so keep in mind, when we're looking through a message digest with a length equivalent to the input message, when you have a hash algorithm, it's a certain number of bits. Doesn't matter how long you're putting it in, it's always going to be that same length. So we know it's not going to be the equivalent. And well, I mean, I guess technically it could if you put in the exact right amount, highly unlikely. Variable length message digest from the input. No, we're always going to have that fixed length. So fixed length from a variable length input message. Okay, doesn't matter how long what we're putting in is, we're going to have the same length coming out. And then variable length from fixed length. No, I guess technically that could be correct, right? Because you could have very fixed length inputs, but that's not what we're looking at here.
So for the test, you gotta know it, but in real life, you're gonna look it up.
Yes,
Not
yes,
looking it up.
that was exactly it.
I'm like, I wouldn't know it.
So the one thing I think when you see a hash algorithm, remember you're gonna have a set output. So it doesn't matter, and remember we have to memorize all the different key lengths and bits and all those message digest lengths. But when you have a hash algorithm, it's always going to be the same output. All right, which of the following is a term used to describe a system you would have done hardening that resides outside your internal network and often used to host services like DNS or web server and accessible to the open internet? Yeah, so we know it's not intrusion prevention and intrusion detection. It's hosting services. So we know it's not a honeypot. So yeah, Bastion host. All right, which of the following answers best describes the type of pen testing where the analyst has full knowledge of the network? Better get that one right.
White box.
Thank you. And best describes the condition that results from a DOS or DDoS, so denial of service, distributed denial of service attack on the target system. So race conditions, remember what, I need a new laptop. I just got shocked again.
Really?
Yeah. Race condition, right? We're gonna execute, we're gonna race to inject our code after the system authenticates, before it executes. Memory leak, buffer overflow, or resource exhaustion. So memory leak, probably not likely. Buffer overflow, maybe, or resource exhaustion. So we're overwhelming the system.
D.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the most correct answer being resource exhaustion. There you go. All right, the whole point of a DDoS or DOS attack, bring down, deny their ability to perform a service, exhaust their resources. All right, last one. Proper testing of applications during the development phase should eliminate the following except cross-site, so denial of service, distributed denial of service. That's pretty hard to eliminate, but I guess you could if you scaled it properly. Cross-site scripting, repudiation, or SQL injection.
What is repudiation?
So that would be you saying, it wasn't me doing it, right? So non-repudiation, that comes back to identification and authentication. It's my username and my password. I can't say it wasn't me that did that.
Share and administrator passwords.
Yeah. That's a tough one. So we know cross-site scripting and SQL injection, absolutely. So we've narrowed it down to two. Is it DOS, DDoS attack, or repudiation?
I mean, you shouldn't, I guess, eliminate repudiation. You should have it there. DOS and DDoS just seem like different things, kind of.
Yeah, so to me, I read this, I would want to eliminate repudiation. I want to be able to log accurately and say, make sure I can tell who's doing what. I would struggle to say, how are you going to eliminate a DOS or DDoS attack? So I'm gonna go with that one. Whew. It gets a little stressful. All right. There we go. So, got it right. What did we get on that one? 86.67, so 13 and 15, it's passing. You don't have to know everything. There's no way you will. There's just too much. What you need to be able to do is memorize as much as you can and look for those key phrases, look for those tips and tricks. So I'm gonna bring that back up. So, see, that's it. Everybody feeling pretty good, overwhelmed, completely lost? A little bit of all? Good, we're doing our job. All right, see everybody on Wednesday.
What are you asking, like 80% for this?
So technically passing would be what, like a 700? It's like roughly 70%. It's not a correct, it's not a direct correlation on that.
And it's adaptive too. Right?
Yeah.
Now, the test is adaptive now. So depending on how you're answering it, you actually may have to answer more questions.
Harder questions.
Yeah, and they're weighted and their stuff, but when you're doing practice tests, that's why, you know, that 80-85% correct, it's gonna give you some wiggle room.
When I did it, I just kept practicing over and over and over until I felt like I was consistently getting over a certain threshold that I felt like, okay, I think I know this material enough, and then I'd move on to the next, whatever.